And so what we're going to do now is we're going to just move over and get Chris to kind of do a deep dive into how Celigo helps from an accounts receivable perspective. So over to you, Chris. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And what we should be seeing now is Celigo. So if you're new to Celigo, welcome in. This is the home dashboard of integrator.io, our integration platform. And from here is where we can see all the different integrations that we've got set up through our integrator.io account. And all these different tiles are representative of a specific type of integration. And today we're going to really focus in on our integration app or integration application for Cash Application Manager, specifically for NetSuite. So what this integration does, and we had touched on it slightly. So going through kind of a front to back process here. So you invoice your customers out of NetSuite. Your customers then go ahead and pay those invoices. They might pay through ACH, maybe they pay via wire, or maybe they send a check to your lockbox. And then from there, your bank would generate a file that our tool would then pull in, consume, parse out, and use to create the actual customer payments inside of NetSuite and apply those payments against open invoices based on the remittance advice that we would find in those bank payment files. So drilling into a little bit deeper, our Cash Application Manager tile here, this is where we can see all the different file types that our tool would support. So a lot of times for banks and interacting with banks, it might be a BAI2 type format, or maybe it's an XML type format. We're seeing kind of a larger move in that direction with open banking becoming more and more relevant here in the last couple of years. MT-MIND 40s, you see that a little bit more over in Europe, or the Nacho for the ACH type integrations. We can also use CSV files. It's really up to the bank in terms of how they like to generate those files. And then based on that, we can configure the tool appropriately. If you're working through with multiple banks, we do allow to connect to as many banks as needed for your specific use case. So if you think about all the kind of major players in the banking space, so the B of A's, the JP Morgans, Wells, of the world, we work with all those. We also work with smaller regional banks, again, as long as there's ways for them to stand up space on an SFTP server for us, we can then pull and extract files down from there. And then this is something that will run on a scheduled basis. So what I'm showing you here is really more the background. This is not something that you as a user would need to be in on a day-to-day basis. I'll get into where that kind of day in the life user interface would be. This is really just showing you the setup and how this would typically run in your specific environment. So we would pull those files down. Typically, it's a nightly run. We're going to go in and pull that on whatever frequency that we would want to set up with the bank. And again, it's usually a nightly batch sort of run. So you set your schedule up, and then it's going to run in the background. You don't need to log into Celigo or anything like that, because typically once we set up things like field mapping or your connections, those are pretty set in stone. You're not going to want to change them, although you do have the option to come in here and adjust your mappings as needed. Now, again, this is really just getting into our tool and taking a peek behind the curtain, so to speak, of how this tool looks in Celigo. But as far as a user's standpoint, that's going to actually be over in NetSuite. So the day-to-day user interface would be fundamentally in NetSuite. So we would be able to see our Cash Application Manager area added to your ribbon. What's really nice about this is that it is part of a managed bundle install into your NetSuite environment. With that bundle install, we will give you a dashboard to do all the work from. If you were a part of our last series for Vendor Payment Manager, you should recognize the dashboard. It looks very similar. We also create a lot of different records for you, some different reports. And also we create a role that you could grant access to whoever on your team would need it. So whoever's working specifically within Cash App, maybe as a day-to-day kind of job function, that's something that you can definitely grant them as far as access is concerned. Now, looking through, again, the dashboard is really where we're going to do a majority of the work out of. So I'll circle back to this and we'll take a deep dive into that dashboard. And as I mentioned, that bundle install in your NetSuite would create a lot of different custom records. So really just think of these records as storing some of that information from those bank files. If you've ever looked at a bank file like a BAI2 1688 or a 64, you would know that it's a pretty harsh file to look at. It's not something that's really meant for human eyes. And so what we do is we break apart those files and we put them into some nice and neatly organized records in your NetSuite environment. And you might notice some things say invoice or credit memo. Just know that these are non-GL posting records. They're simply just tables that hold that data from those bank files. So we're not going to be affecting any of your financial reports. The only thing that we would create that is impacting your GL would be those actual payments. And as we apply those payments against those open invoices. But everything you see here as far as those custom records would not impact that at all. And then lastly, we have some different reports here. So referring to identifying scenarios of short paid invoices or overpaid transactions. And another piece of this also is some additional level of features. So we have short paid invoices. So we're identifying through a threshold. It could be a dollar amount. It can be a percentage. So basically a fixed or a variable threshold. And then from there, if it's identified as within that threshold, we would create a journal entry for the difference. So let's say we created a payment and it left $1 that was unapplied for whatever reason. We can use that if it falls within, hey, so we set up a threshold of $5. It's within that, right? So we'll have that $1 threshold and use that to create a journal entry against a specific write-off account of your choosing. So once you connect Celigo to your NetSuite, we're going to get access to your chart of accounts. So you'll be able to select whatever GL account you want to post that variance against. And then we also have the same concept for the overpaid transactions. So overpaid transactions is kind of exactly what it sounds like. So in an overpay scenario, instead of creating a journal entry, what our tool is able to do is actually create a customer deposit. So we can record that liability in case, for example, you need to refund that customer for that overpayment scenario. Or if you would prefer, you could just create a credit on their account and they can just apply that to the next invoice that gets issued for that client. So a lot of different feature sets that come with these different reports. Both features come with the tool regardless. You don't have to use them. They're simply there if they fit your use case. And then we also have match rates. So the match rate here, the idea is to get your match rate as high as possible, reduce the number of touches that it takes to fully apply that cash against your open invoices. So really just trying to get that hit rate as high as we possibly can based on the information we're getting from the bank and what's sitting in your NetSuite environment. All right, so now, without further ado, let's jump into the dashboard. So the dashboard is, although Celigo branded, it is fundamentally still NetSuite if we look at the URL here. So again, it's something that just sits right on top of NetSuite. So it still allows us to read and write data directly into NetSuite from this dashboard. Then from here, we can filter out the different banks that we're working with. Again, if you have multiple banks, especially if you're international, you'd be able to filter these results out accordingly. So if you have different people responsible for different banks and working with those different banks, they can always come in here and filter their results out. Or if they want to filter by different accounts or payment types, so maybe someone handles more EFTs versus the lockbox kind of wet signature scenarios, you can filter the results out here as well. And then your start date, your end date, this is something, again, because we're typically pulling these files on a nightly basis, you would run every day so that when you come in the next day, you know exactly what you have ahead of you. Now in this demonstration account, I've got a little bit larger date range that I'm going to pull through, but this is what you would expect to see anytime you come in, you load your transaction up and you get an idea of your transaction status. So this is really referring to the payment statuses and then how we identify or match those NetSuite customers. So looking at our transaction statuses, we have all these different status categories that we incorporate here. If you know NetSuite, there's really fundamentally basically applied, unapplied, or deposited, undeposited. Doesn't really tell you all that much. Now with these, we give you some additional levels of flexibility in terms of driving reporting and just making sure that you're going through and checking off all the different transactions that would fall into these different buckets. And then our match method is saying, how do we identify the customers in NetSuite from the customers in your bank file. A lot of times there's a few different ways of going about that. So we give you different options. So that can be an exact match. So that's saying, hey, the name in that bank file matches exactly the name in NetSuite. No guesswork needed. We can also memorize a maker string. So maker strings at the bottom of those checks. We can use that as a customer ID, essentially. And so we can relate the two. So, hey, anytime you see that maker number, we automatically know it is a specific NetSuite customer. Then we also have the ability for an alias match. I would say this is one of our more popular match methods because 9 times out of 10, your NetSuite customer name and those bank file customer names will not be the same. And so what we've found is the ability to house another naming convention is really, really beneficial. So very similar to the maker number match, we would be able to store another customer name and relate that to your NetSuite customer name. So you don't have to go in and change anything of how it's set up in NetSuite. You can just simply pull that name and add it into NetSuite, or you can actually upload it in mass into the account as well. So if you've got a running list of all the different bank file customer names and which NetSuite customer it belongs to, you'd be able to, again, automate that as well. Then we also have approximate name match, which allows you to be a little bit more aggressive or conservative, depending on how you want to handle that in terms of how we match those customers. So what we're saying here is Cinnamon Ltd is close enough to Cinnamon Inc. within a reasonable degree of certainty using fuzzy logic on the back end to just make sure that, okay, we're pretty sure this is lined up. So let's go ahead and use that going forward. Now, a lot of times, if it is something like this, we would just simply say that as an alias going forward, but that is up to you. And then we also have the idea of a manual match. So that means we had to come in here, actually affect and change something because whatever we were getting from that bank file didn't quite match up to what we were expecting to see and what is already in NetSuite. So I'll walk through a lot of these different scenarios here as we kind of go through the rest of the demonstration. So going through our different payment statuses. So applied means a payment applied fully against one or maybe multiple invoices. It can, oftentimes is a one-to-many kind of relationship, especially if you're working with customers where you provide a multitude of services. Partially applied is really what it sounds like, a payment applied to one or again, multiple invoices, but the balance isn't fully applied yet. So there's a little bit left unapplied that we want to go in and work. We also have the unapplied scenario, which is a situation where our tool is able to identify the NetSuite customer just fine, but maybe for whatever reason, there's no remittance advice included. And so instead of going in and applying that payment against any invoice that might be open, we just create the payment for you, create against the correct NetSuite customer, but we give your team some time to do their due diligence to make sure that that cash is being applied correctly for the correct invoices. So when you generate your customer statements and send them out, they're not going to have any questions of, hey, we paid this invoice off. Why is this not paid? Those sort of things wouldn't come up for you. And then we also have unidentified. So unidentified is a little bit more of a rare occurrence. This would be a situation where our tool was not able to identify a customer or B, an invoice. So there's no remittance. And for whatever reason, all we got from that bank file was a simple string here, and that didn't match up to any customer that we found. And so we'll go through each of those scenarios and how we would work each of those down the line. Lastly, errors skipped. I'll be honest, this is not something you're going to run into all that often. In fact, I see a lot of customers skipping certain customers, maybe on purpose, depending on who they're working with. If you're working with a lot of big box retailers, a lot of times you're going to find that they're not going to send you remittance, like your Targets, your Home Depots. They're not sending you remittance. They're saying, hey, log into our portal and you can see what we're paying. And so they're not submitting that to the bank. They'll just say, here's $100,000, figure it out. And so sometimes we would skip that just to make sure we don't have to deal with that kind of headache. But again, this is not something that comes up all too often because typically these bank files, they are static in nature. They're not going in and getting changed or anything like that. If you are changing it, that means the bank would be changing it and they're charging you per keystroke to do that. And so again, that's not something you typically run into. So the error skipped is a little bit more rare. If there's errors, usually it's more going to be a connection issue. So maybe the bank's server is down or maybe NetSuite's down for whatever reason, in which case we would hold on to that retry data and then push it in when we get access again. Now, going through each of the scenarios, we'll walk through partially applied. So again, this is a payment applied to one or multiple invoices. So I want to hit this drop down. This basically tells me the story behind that payment. So we're able to see, okay, in that bank file contained an invoice reference ID, and then we're able to match that up to a corresponding NetSuite invoice. And then we have a unique payment identifier, what we were able to apply, and ultimately what was actually included in that payment. So quick mental math tells us a little bit is left unapplied. So from here, we'll go in and click on this hyperlink to the left. What this will do is take us to one of those custom records that we create for you. And again, it just breaks down that bank payment file into a much more digestible sort of form. So we can come in here and you can also write reports against this. For example, save searches. If you want to be notified anytime one of these records is created where there is an error or the status is anything other than applied, and throw it on a dashboard or email people based on those results, you can absolutely do that. But what we want to get to is this native transaction subtab. This subtab is what links that customer payment in NetSuite. So this is the actual standard NetSuite transaction for that payment. And we can see over on the top right-hand side that we have a little bit left unapplied. So from here, this is where we want to go, and maybe we need to research this. We reach out to the customer. Hey, what do you want us to do with this, the rest of this unapplied cash? If this was a overpay type scenario, that's where we could use our feature around overpaid transactions to record a customer deposit. Or if you wanted to create a credit off of this, that's something that you would be able to do within just native NetSuite as well. But let's just say, just for the sake of the example, hey, we went in and they said, hey, it's invoice ending in 124. Use it for that specifically. Then we can go in, save it, and now it's just native NetSuite at this point. So we're not doing anything, custom or anything like that. Standard native NetSuite functionality. That in turn will go ahead and adjust or update our Cash App transaction record, which then in turn refresh our dashboard and takes a slice out of that pie. So the idea behind Cash Application Manager is to work more by exception rather than the holistic volume of all of the payments that you have coming in, and really, again, try to reduce the amount of touches you might have into and out of this cash application process. And with that, Michael, I will pass it back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. That was awesome. That was super awesome. I'm sure everybody got a lot of value from watching that. And thank you for being so thorough and going, so deep for us. That was perfect. Thank you so much.